College of Arts and Sciences at Lawrence Technological University. And welcome to those of us joining online live or in the future through our YouTube channel. My name is Dr. Paul Jawson, and I am the chair of the Department of Humanities, Social Sciences, and Communication here at Lawrence Tech, and co-director of the Humanity and Technology lecture series, of which today's event constitutes a part. Our lecture series offers an interdisciplinary conversation about the world we make and what it means. We bring leading humanities scholars to LTU's campus, where they help us interpret, imagine, or understand the past, present, and future of our technologies. Every one of our events is free and open to the public, and designed to create a dialogue between students, faculty, technologists, artists, business leaders, and community members. And many of our events are archived on our website, so if you Google LTU Humanity+Technology, you can find our catalog there. Thank you very much for joining us today, and a special thanks to our partners, the College of Architecture and Design, as well as the Howard Hughes Medical Institute for helping to fund today's talk. Before we introduce today's speaker, I want to announce our next Humanity and Technology event, which will be a roundtable on AI and the future of education at LTU, held on April 6th at 12:30 p.m. in the atrium of the Buell Building. This will be an open town hall conversation about new developments in AI and the future of education, which I hope everyone in this room and really anyone around the world is invested in. There will be a moderated roundtable with one representative from each of our colleges and a student representative, followed by an open forum for conversation among the panelists and the audience. And our hope is that everyone will have a chance to sort of express their fears, hopes, dreams, frustrations, and fantasies about what AI might do in the future here at LTU. So please do join us.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Dr. Ahu Yolaç, and I'm an assistant professor of game design at the College of Architecture and Design. And I'm a multidisciplinary designer, and I teach classes like integrated game studio, level design, multidisciplinary design studio, and design principles. And at the College of Architecture and Design, we believe that the future of design is multidisciplinary, and we host a range of design degrees that include graphic design, product and transportation design, game design, interiors, and architecture. And we track design future trends, emerging technologies, and advancements in practice as a means of crafting education approaches in these areas. Our co-ed design and technology lecture series allows us to engage in design discussions and offer broad perspectives on where we are headed. And on Thursday, March 16th, we present Damon Leverett, who will speak on geometry algorithms in architecture, exploring the math behind generative grid systems. And we are excited to announce our upcoming show, LTU Quad 2023 student exhibition. The industry and alumni opening night is May 4th, and the public can view the work on May 5th. And for co-ed events and for all co-ed events and lectures, visit our website for details and to register. So, as a scholar, my research is in the area of critical play, critical pedagogy, and designing for meaningful experiences. In that sense, Dr. Gray's texts and talks have always been very central to my research and the way I look at games. As an educator, I believe every game designer and every designer we are sending to the industry should interact with Dr. Gray's work and study it. And we already integrated her book, Woke Gaming, into our curriculum already. So this is a wonderful opportunity for our students to have a chance to meet with her and learn from her. And now I'm excited to introduce today's speaker of the Spring 2023 Humanity and Technology Lecture Series, Dr. Kishonna Gray.
Is that my cue to go on? I just wanted to make sure it was. How are you all doing? It's such a huge honor. I don't think I realized how much you all interacted and engaged with my work. So that's a huge honor to hear you all incorporate woke gaming and my other work into your curricula. I appreciate you all. Do you need me to pause for a second, or are we okay? Are we good to go? Just put it in the chat if there are any kind of like tech issues, or if there are any things you need me to stop, or if I'm having connectivity issues, just email and just let me know. Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'm honored to be here today. First, I love talking about my work. I love sharing my work, but I also love how intentional you all are about the audience for these kinds of talks. I love that lecture, that humanity and technology, right? And I think that, of course, we're doing a lot better, like, going outside like our disciplines to have these, cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary, multi-transdisciplinary, whatever we want to call, to have these kinds of conversations like with each other, right? Especially I think it's really important that we have like this ethic of care and this communal care like around the work that we're doing, from the makers, creators, designers, the thinkers, like all of us are contributing, to these conversations in really significant ways. And so I'm really, really glad and I'm honored to be in this space with you all. So thank you for being intentional about this work. It's truly like a model, for other folks like to really take heed to. Whenever I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about, like in this space, especially when I see like the blending of both, the humanities and the technology folks, like in the space, I think about the dilemmas that I was often in trying to have conversations in the technological space, but also not having, somebody said, like, I don't have the chops to talk about it because I'm not a programmer. I'm not a coder, in those early days, I mean, like it's wild, like pre-Twitter days, I'm thinking about like when I was in grad school, like around like 2005. And, so the makers and the doers and creators were over there, and then all of us critiquing the things that they were making and doing. We were over here. We weren't really like talking to one another, right? And I thought that was just such a huge disservice. And I thought it was a huge disservice because then I noticed the things that you could tell that there was a disconnect in the room. And I noticed that especially in gaming, most of my work, is like this cultural critique of gaming, but also, cultural appreciation of the stuff that, gaming has created. So I often use this phrase whenever I give talks that gaming is like technology's canary in the coal mine, right? And I'm from coal country, I'm from rural Kentucky, not far, from like Appalachia, so I often talk in like terms of like coal and mining, right? That's like a core narrative, like for me, right? And I use that frame like, if we were to pay attention to what gaming was doing and saying, especially in those early innovative years where they were just, like the technology was just something new, like all the time, right? I really think that we could have avoided like a lot of these issues. And you were all like, well, Kishonna, what do you mean? Right. I have a few slides. Let me go ahead and share these slides here. So if I just said, I went to grad school in the early 2000s, right? And so I was a gamer, right? Let me start the show. I can never find the thing to start the show. So I was in grad school in the early 2000s, and I was a gamer, but I didn't realize at the time that I can study gaming like as an academic inquiry, right? I had no idea. So in 2005, started grad school. August 2005, that was also the time that Hurricane Katrina hit. Now, a lot of you all, depending on how old you are, you may remember it. You might not remember it. It was like it actually was like one of those 9/11 moments or, whatever the moment is, like, COVID moments, like, where you were when things were shut down. You remember where you were when 9/11 happened. You remember where you were when you saw these images pouring out on our screens from the devastation of actually it wasn't, the impacts of Hurricane Katrina, but, we call it Katrina, but it was mostly like, a human created error, right? But I remember just seeing these images pour out from my screens. And I was just fascinated. We didn't have social media at the time, but I was really fascinated with the way people utilize, especially when folks got displaced out of New Orleans and throughout the country. I was fascinated with how people use like the comment section to kind of connect and find one another. Now, we didn't use network analysis, especially like in our network analysis wasn't something that a social scientist or humanities like really used back then. But I realized at the time, I was trying to do like this network analysis of trying to understand how people make connections and utilize comment section. We didn't call it social media, but how they utilize it then. I'm also fascinated with the ways and folks use, MySpace and Black Planet to connect. And also, Facebook was very much like a college student kind of thing. So Facebook wasn't like the thing that folks, it wasn't even a part of the conversation. I know that's wild to hear, right? But I was fascinated by that. But I realized, as I was continuing with this work, it became very heavy, like to do this work. And I remember, like, whenever I was going to collect the data, I would spend most of my time like crying and sad, like, how did this happen? How, like, look at these poor folks, like in the Gulf region. Oh my gosh, nobody cares. They need help. They're being like all these kinds of things. What's going to happen to New Orleans? They've, and then, so I realized it was heavy work. But I remember my advisor saying to me, He said, Kishonna, worried about you. But just know that whatever you do, for your dissertation work, you're going to be committed to it for the next decade of your academic career. Now, during that time, I couldn't really see it, right? But it's been more than a decade now, and so, he was very much right. But I realized, I was like, I don't know if I can do that work, right? And so he was like, well, Kishonna, why don't you just shift gears? You do the things to protect yourself, but, also, stay committed to communities. He was like, you can do, like your work in the communities, but you can also have, your dissertation work can be separate. They don't have to be one and the same. So I really appreciated that advice. And so he was like, well, what can we do? This is my second year. I think I was approaching comprehensive, qualifying exams time. And he was like, well, Kishonna, we got to figure it out. He said, when you're in your free time, when you're just having fun, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm playing video games. And he was like, oh, really? He probably was thinking I'm reading and doing deep dives like down this work. Let me speed up. I know I don't have that much time, but I have to give you like a little bit of background in order for you to understand where I'm going here with this talk here. So he was like, and I had a summer class. I was doing an ethnography. I was learning qualitative methods during this time, because also quantitative stats, not my wheelhouse. I'm like, what's this regression analysis? It wasn't my wheelhouse, right? And so, he was like, well, there's also this qualitative work that you can do. And I also came from like a quant heavy field too. So, but it really wasn't my wheelhouse. So, I started taking a lot of more qualitative methods, and those made sense to me. And so I took this class and I did an ethnography of like video games. And I was fascinated. I was fascinated because I didn't realize that there wasn't that much work on it. So when I was trying to do the literature review, I couldn't find much to help me understand what experiences like people like that look like me were like. So they did a lot of good gender analysis. Folks were given like, these ethnographic accounts of like these gaming spaces, EverQuest and, World of Warcraft, those kinds of things were very popular back then. But it just wasn't capturing what I was seeing in the space. So I did my deep dive down there, right? And so this was like I started to collect like a lot of stuff. And I came across this game, and I was floored by the beauty of this game, because never had I ever seen Black culture featured in this way. So what you're seeing on your screen right now is something called the Black College Football Experience. Now, the Black College Football Experience was a game from a company out of New Orleans, and it was released in 2007. 2007, it was released on PC. In 2009, it was released on consoles. I think Xbox 360, I believe. And so I played this game and I thought it was fascinating, right? I grew up in a family, I have family members, they went to HBCUs. I didn't come through a HBCU tradition. I went to a PWI, predominantly white institution, from my undergraduate work, but I was always connected. I was always there at HBCUs because they're like part of my culture, like as well, right? And so I was really excited because most of us, if you know anything about, sports culture or culture like at HBCUs, and especially going to like games, you go for a halftime show, you go for the band. And so whenever people were reading these reviews, so many people couldn't understand, like, why do you have a halftime show in this game? Why do we care about the halftime show? Why do we care about the band? Why do we care about the majorettes? Why are these women dancing? So it was a game that was created, and the people, the audiences didn't have context really to make sense of the game. So the game actually didn't do that well in the market, right? But I also think that, it was released during a time where you had Madden. It was competing with games like Madden. It was competing with NCAA. NCAA, still had a football game during that time, before, the NIL kind of things, kind of happened, name, image, likeness, all those suits that kind of took place. So I was fascinated and floored by this. And I was like, wow, I did not know that games could depict and feature like Black folks in this way, right? It was Black-owned company out of New Orleans. And the first time that I remember playing a Black woman, it was around 2009, 2011. So all these things are kind of happening around the same time, right? And it just seemed like, just all these dynamic things were happening. So the first time I remember playing a Black woman, her name is Perna Jackson, and this game is called Dead Island. Now, Dead Island, of course, the zombie genre. And if anybody knows anything about the zombie genre, we like to get real diverse when it comes to the zombie genre. And they like to feature Black women in zombie genres. It's very, very common now. But I think it's, there's a critique, this is not the point of the talk today, but I think it's really interesting to think about when we incorporate Black women, it's like these Black women are having to like save the world, right? It's like, okay, we didn't feature you here, but when the apocalypse is happening and things are hitting the fan, we might need to rely on Black women to save us. So bring these Black women in to save the day, right? That's kind of how I feel with like incorporating Black women into the zombie genre. But I was really excited about, Perna Jackson in this game. Another game that was released. Now people sent me this game to play. So this is The Walking Dead, and that's Lee Everett. Now, when folks sent me this game, they were like, Kishonna, you're gonna love this, because it shows this Black man, and it shows he's like a father figure, it shows masculinity, in complex ways, not just like in stereotypical ways that we often saw, like in a lot of media. And so a friend actually, recommended this game to me. And so whenever I first, the opening scene, I saw this, and I saw this Black man in the back of a police cruiser. And so I was like, why would my friend think that I would want to see an image like this, right? Why I would want to engage in a narrative like this. And then my friend was like, Kishonna, what are you talking about? That has nothing to do with the rest of the game. But in my mind, because I'm thinking about the design part of it, like the creation part, I'm like, somebody sat around a table and was like, oh, let's put the Black man in the back of a police cruiser. That will truly authenticate his experience, right? Because in my mind, I'm like, if this has nothing to do with the rest of the game, why then couldn't we engage with what we learn about him later? We actually learned that Lee Everett is a professor at the University of Georgia. He's a professor of history. So in my mind, I'm like, why couldn't the game have started in a lecture hall? Why couldn't we have, seen him like on campus, right? Those are the kinds of questions that I ask, right? Because I'm thinking in like both these ways. I'm thinking from the design aspect and from the experience aspect, and also like from the narrative aspect as well. I think all those things they go in tandem with one another. Something else that was happening around this time. In 2010, the Kinect was released. So for those of you all who don't know the Kinect, for those of us who were like in the world, in the gaming world, we knew this as Project Natal. So Project Natal was basically the thing that Zoom is allowing for us today, using like cameras, like to engage in synchronous kind of ways with the things, like on the computer screen, right? This human computer interaction, right? And the Kinect was really interesting because, in the gaming space, it's like your body became the controller. So we were like able to move and interact, with the experience that we were seeing on our screen. And there were all kinds of amazing applications for the Kinect, right? The Kinect had accessibility features. The Kinect was going to allow, folks to utilize like their bodies in ways that were like freeing. I'm thinking about also around this time, I had the Kinect in my gaming lab this was around 2013, I believe. So I had the Kinect in my gaming lab, and I had there were some deaf Black women that came into the lab, and they played the game. And at first we were just playing, they had controllers in their hands, but because they use sign language, it took away their mode of like communication. And so I was like, oh, this isn't going to work. Because in my mind, I thought that was a violent act that I put the controller in their hand and took away their mode of communication. And so I was like, well, let's pull out the Kinects, so that way it would free their hands and would allow them to communicate like in real time again. So there were all kinds of amazing potentials and possibilities for the Kinect. But when the Kinect was first released, and we experienced this, I had the Kinect, I had it during a summer class. And so for those of us on college campuses, not many students take advantage of summer classes, right? It's like the students who have like scholarships and financial aid. So during that summer, it was student athletes. And we all know most of our student athletes are, a lot of them are Black, African-American, like folks in the classroom. And so I had the Kinect. They were the first users of the Kinect. And sadly, the Kinect was not able to read them and read their skin. They spent, those football players, they were spending a lot of time outside. Camp was starting, 2-a-days was happening, so they had really beautiful tans, and so they were bronze, they were dark, they were dark skinned, during the class, but it wasn't reading them, right? And so we kind of, we didn't go on Twitter because Twitter wasn't the thing that we think about it right now. So we went down, looked at the forums. We did deep dives down the forums and, looked at some of the tech magazines that were happening during that time. And so, we looked to figure out if other people were having issues like with the Kinect. And sure enough, there were other Black folks, and there were articles and news reports of people saying the Kinect can't read me. The Kinect can't read me. It's not reading my body. I have a bigger body. It's not reading me. I'm darker skinned. It's not reading me, right? And so basically the story that came out, sometimes later was that, oh, this is not a Connect problem. This is a you problem. You don't have enough lighting. You haven't set it up. They put it on the individual to try to make sense of why it wasn't reading certain bodies, right? And so we were like, okay. But in my mind, I was like, no, something's not right here, because they did a little bit of patching, and then they fixed it, right? And in my mind, what I knew, especially about conversations that I had, like with, my engineer friends and my computer science friends, I had a friend that was over like in computer science, and he was trying to, we worked together like a whole lot. And he was like, I don't know why, Kishonna, it works for my students. I don't know why it doesn't work for yours. And I said, all right, I was like, okay, George, let's think about the optics here. Give me the makeup of your students. He said, well, I have mostly male. Actually, it was all male. And they were white and East Asian. And I said, okay, think about the students that might come through my lab, right? And he said, yeah, Kishonna, you have most of the Black and brown students like in your classes. And he was like, sure. And I think in that moment, he was like, surely this can't be it, right? But he also knew, because he had worked in the industry before, he had worked there. He said, I bet during the testing phases, they probably didn't have anybody with a bigger body there. They probably didn't have any darker skinned people there. They probably just did not test it on a range of bodies, because they tested it on the people who look like them. They tested on the people who made it, right? And most of those people, they look like one another, right? And so it was really interesting then to think about what some of this recognition technology then morphed into, right? Because there was never any interjection at that moment to say, hey, Houston, we have a problem, right? And so then what do we get, right? Sometime later, a few years later, we have all kinds of issues with facial recognition technology, where it's racially biased and it can't tell Jamal from Jerome. It can't tell Muhammad from Abdul. It cannot differentiate these different faces, because the algorithms is only reading what system the humans have put into the system, right? And I think it's like really, I think these stories, especially what we're hearing, especially, you all aren't, you're right there like in Detroit. And so I'm thinking about like Project Greenlight, one of the things that's very significant, to that area, right? Like the promise of being able to better service, communities and businesses, and to make, law enforcement's job like a lot easier, right? But then at what cost? We have to think about like at what cost is this actually happening, right? It's at the cost of, civil liberties. It's at the cost of like our human rights and like basic dignity, that these, surveillance technologies are then, implanted into like some of the most vulnerable like kinds of populations, right? Without any like significant interrogation of what these actually mean and what they're actually capturing, and like what the larger kinds of conversations are. In the book Intersectional Tech, there is this line that I think is really, really useful to help me make sense of a lot of the stuff that I do. So space is not just a passive backdrop to human behavior and social action, but it's constantly produced and remade within complex relations of culture, power, and difference. Let me read that again. Space is not just a passive backdrop to human behavior and social action, but it's constantly produced and remade within complex relations of culture, power, and difference. I think we don't often think about like that, the blurring of the lines between like the physical and like the digital or cyber, whatever you want to call it, right? I don't think we often think deeply, right, about that, the digital manifestation of the physical realities of the spaces in which we're creating and what we're doing and what we're making, right? Of how we bring in our own assumptions and we bring in like our own biases into the things that we make and create. And then we think we have this neutral landscape. We think we have this neutral palette in which all things are equal and fair, right? Without realizing, that we are telling these systems how to think and how to operate, right? And I think that's where like a lot of scholars that have like come up like in this space like are kind of are discussing, those kinds of ramifications. Ruha Benjamin, Sophia Noble, Andre Brock, you have all these scholars, who have been thinking deeply, because a lot of our populations have been the populations that have been, severely impacted, most negatively impacted, by the expansion of these technologies. And I think that's where like a lot of my work is significant, and where I think like if we paid a little more like attention like inside the gaming space, then we could have started these conversations in a lot sooner. because gaming has been the space that has been like the site of like all these innovations, and they have just been, you know, pumping out like all these kinds of like technologies. And I think that's been a very significant kind of thing. And let's see, where did I want to go here? Let's see. I don't think I wanted to talk about, actually, I'll talk about these two. You know, a lot of people ask me the question, you know, they say, well, you know, Kishonna, were you talking about how bad the games were then? You know, surely they've gotten better, right? And so when I offer like a few examples to kind of show what the landscape of like Blackness like inside the space is, because I think it's also important, right? So when we think about, you know, blending that, the conversations of like the humanities and like the tech and technologies, right? You know, we're thinking about all of us like coming together in this space. So yes, representations matter, because those are like the most visible message and the most visible like narrative that's being deployed, what we see on the screen. But I think it's also important, and why I'm very invested in thinking about like behind the scenes. I'm thinking about who's creating this stuff, who's at the table when these decisions are made, how are like the marketing and advertising like decisions made, and what are they doing like to tell the story. So if you were to do that QR code, hopefully that QR code is big enough for you to like click on there. So if you were to QR code, this is going to take you to the trailer for this game, Assassin's Creed, which is, it's not the main franchise of Assassin's Creed. It is DLC. It is downloadable content. Why do I have this example here? So during this time, I think this is probably around the year 2016. We're in the midst of two significant social movements, right? We're in the midst of like the movement for Black Lives. But we're also in the midst of something called like Gamergate, right? And so Gamergate is basically the harassment campaign against women inside the space, but it is also, you know, basically just anybody who critiques gaming and technology, they are subject to, you know, digital and real world harms, you know, by these people who feel like that their space, that their space is being taken away, that they have to make space for the other. And, you know, I think it's like one of those moments of like, you know, we don't want to change. There's a lot of entitlement culture. I think that's really like the easiest way, especially for those of you who might not know Gamergate culture. And so why did I share this game, right? So one, me and a colleague, you know, we're looking at, you know, whenever diversity is featured in a lot of these games, it's featured as the DLC, as downloadable content. Why is this significant, Kishonna? I think that there is a critique that could be made whenever a gaming studio or a gaming company doesn't feel the need to feature diversity inside their main hero, the main antagonist, right? So a lot of conversations are happening there, right? So if we think about like the company Ubisoft got into some hot water because they basically said women are too hard to animate. You could look up that hashtag. I don't think I have that image up there. I don't. My apologies. But hashtag women are too hard to animate. And so in this was basically people saying, hey, can we finally have a woman, you know, it's a character in the in this universe. And they're like, oh, that takes so much time to create a woman, you know, they're hard to animate. We won't, when the industry has been doing this, you know, very well, you know, for a lot of years. But I think what the critique actually was that no, we can't see a woman inside this space. We're not going to create her as like this hero because it's ahistorical. You know, there weren't women that existed during Roman times or women that existed, you know, during Viking times or whatever the times were, right? And so I think it's really interesting when we think about like who's creating these stories, you know, what narratives are being told, who's brought to the table to help tell these stories, right? Because I think at any moment in history, you can find women in any of these spaces, right? But anyway, that's a different conversation. So that's the trailer that you're seeing. But I think also why I shared this example is because whenever, you know, gaming did diversify, they did the thing that media does, and they'll feature Blackness in 3 particular roles, right? They'll feature Blackness in slave narratives. That's a common trope. It's a common story. It's a common thread. You know, well, oh yeah, we'll feature slavery, right? Second one is like Blackness is like the help, and that could be under like the slavery umbrella. Like, you know, Black or brownness is like domestics, you know, support roles, but also, you know, like Blackness is like the buddy sidekick. You know, that's like a common narrative inside media. But also Black and brown as like the criminal, right? You know, you have like, you know, Middle Eastern, you know, men is always the terrorists inside, you know, some of the military games. You know, you have Black and brown, you know, Latinx guys, you know, it's like the drug dealers. You know, when you feature like East Asian characters, you know, they're always always like, like the Yakuza or, like, Asian gangs or something, so they always like, they will be featured, but they're featured or in or in martial arts kinds of ways, so they'll be featured in ways that make sense to the racial categorization that a lot of dominant, dominant populations have of racially, racial minorities, excuse me. And so in this game in particular, so this game is Battlefield 1. Feel free to QR code. This is going to take you to that opening narrative and that opening scene in that game. It's a really, really beautiful game. And so I was very intrigued by the Harlem Hellfighters, right? Because I was excited because I think it's the first time that that any of the Black regiments or Black infantrymen had been featured. It features Black military. The Harlem Hellfighters are a real group of folks. They have an actual real history, and they feature like Black and Latinx men, from New York area, and they have a lot of success, whatever we call success in war terms. It's all, nobody succeeds. You know what I mean? They had some successes like in France, so they did very well. So, but what you see inside Battlefield 1, inside this video game, you see a lot of Black death. Now, this game was released in 2016. We're in the midst of hashtag Black Death everywhere, right? Ezell Ford, Michael Brown, so many, Philando Castile, we have so many names of people who are dying, like the hands of law enforcement. And then the opening scene of this game with Harlem Hellfighters continues like the pattern of like Black death. So you'll play a little bit, but when people play this game, and when a lot of us play shooters, when we play video games, we think we're John McClane, right? We think we're like, this diehard character, or we're like, we just run in and we just shoot everybody. We'll die, we'll spawn back, right? That's usually like the template, for a lot of us, like who play inside these shooter games, right? And honey, I'm gonna talk. Give me a second. Okay, thank you. So whenever we were playing this game, we felt like the game wanted us to die. We were playing, but we realized like our health wasn't generating back. And it's like the game wanted us to succumb to this violence on this battlefield. And so the first moment, and I'm so sorry I didn't share. Usually it's too clunky to switch. And so I'll stop sharing it. So I just kind of just send folks like the link. But if you're playing, we're in this game, we're shooting, and then we die. And on the screen, there's like a memoriam of where it says Willie Jefferson. It gives like the date that you were born and the date that you died there on Battlefield. And like in that moment when we watched that, we were like, oh my gosh, this is so beautiful. What an honor, that we will honor, our fallen soldiers like in this way, right? That's how we felt. We all had like this emotional experience. And so we had the emotional experience, but then, gamer mode turned back on, and we were like, okay, but if Mr. Willie just died on the battlefield, who am I right now? And so we're back in battle, right? We're like, okay, well, let's go fight some more, right? So we're in a tank, or we got our gun, and like we're shooting. And then of course the game is killing me. The game won't. And for those of us who play this, we're like, we can figure this out. We'll generate our health, but we could tell that the game wants you to die. We died. Adolf Sims, whatever his name is, the year he was born, the year he died, 1915, like on the battlefield or whatever, right? And like at that moment, we're like, okay, they're honoring a lot more. So in this moment, we're like, oh, they're honoring people. I had one of my students, because we're in the gaming lab, I had one of my students look up. I was like, look up these names. Like, are these real people? Did they actually connect like with their families? And and it really thought it was like a beautiful honor. So we died, and then the game spawns us and shifts us around. So like another life. And so we're here and we're fighting and shooting. And this time we're really becoming frustrated, right? Because we feel stuck in this narrative that the game is forcing us, is subjecting us to. And keep in mind, I'm sure if we were to open up Twitter, we would have seen that somebody else had just died, and it was just so much Black death. And we just couldn't understand why the game wanted us to experience Blackness in these very painful ways, right? Of where we only see the final moments of this person's life. We don't see a holistic experience in a way that we might have in another game where we're playing, like Soap and Call of Duty, where we know everything about them, right? We are only able to engage in just a few seconds in this Black man's life because the game won't let him live. Let me speed up there. Well, Kishonna, what other games were there? Surely there was something positive during this time, right? Here's another gaming experience, a VR experience, actually a more beautiful experience. And what's different about this game? I'll go ahead and give you the end of the story at the beginning. I Am a Man VR was created by Professor Derek Ham. He was at NC State at the time he made this. I think he might still be there. And so he was in the, I believe he might be like in computer science and like engineering. You know, he's like on like the technical side. But he created this narrative, and I thought it was really beautiful and really powerful. So you can QR code, you can see this experience, or just kind of pin it for a future moment and for a future time. But this game takes you to Memphis, Tennessee, around the time that Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. And a lot of us, a lot of folks don't know the reason why Dr. King was in Memphis, right? He was there to support the Poor People's Campaign around, it was the sanitation worker strike, for those of you who might not know, right? So the sanitation workers, were striking because they wanted better working conditions, better pay. And there was also, some conversations along the lines of race. So in this experience, we actually hear real narratives. We hear real stories. We hear the real interviews that were happening and that that have been archived from the sanitation workers strike during that time. And so Black men were saying, like, if it's raining and they, they're not working, then they get sent home and they don't get paid. Whereas their white counterparts were still getting paid. So this is why they were out there striking, right? Because of a whole host of their conditions. Now we are a character. We're a sanitation worker, but we haven't yet joined this movement, right? And if you see on your screen, hopefully you can see there are Black men that are wearing like the cutout, like the boards around their body that says "I am a man." And so these are like real images, from that movement, from that protest. But we're following this worker who is surrounded by Jim Crow reality, who is surrounded by, he's reading like newspapers, of where, they found the Freedom Riders, who have been killed. You see the newspaper clippings from like the deaths of like Emmett Till. So all of this Black death is like around him, right? And then he was like, and then the character that you are, like, we go through like a series like a series of different scenes of where he's being exposed to all this. And then, he decides, to join the movement. So he joins the movement, he goes out to protest. And then I think Dr. King actually invites him to come to his hotel at the Lorraine Motel. So he gets invited. So then one of the scenes, this may be like the fourth or fifth scene inside the game. And so in that moment, of course, a lot of us know what this is. For those of us who know anything about, the life and death of Dr. Martin Luther King, the Lorraine Hotel, that's where he's killed, right? And so here you are, you're the character walking up to it. And then the game fades to black. And then we hear a shot. And then there's a cut scene then to Bobby Kennedy announcing the death of Dr. Martin Luther King, right? Now, why was that so significant? That was significant to me for a lot of reasons. So in the class, where we were talking about this, we often think about the design decisions and the things and the design narratives, like the things that were a part of like the behind the scenes. And I remember a student saying, they said, Dr. Gray, if this were a AAA studio, if this were Rockstar Games creating this game, they would have showed the sniper, his area, they would have had you follow, and when you hit the shot, they probably would have followed the bullet all the way to Dr. King's body. And I was like, David, you're absolutely right. They probably would have. But then the students were like, the care and concern, because we focused a lot like on the people who were behind the scenes of these games, right? They recognize a distinct difference in who created and made this game, right? They recognize, there are no Black people on the team that made, the Adewale experience. There are no Black people on the team that made, like a lot of these other experiences of where they're creating Black experiences inside games. But here's a game that's created by a Black man, and there was care. There was an ethic of care around the death of Dr. Martin Luther King. And y'all know, like, for Black folks, Dr. King is like a sacred entity, right? He's on the wall next, Dr. King is next to Jesus and President Kennedy, right? And now Obama. Black folks love, these figures, they're sacred figures. So there was a lot of care taken, to still interact and engage in that moment, but it wasn't used in like exploitative ways. So that fade to black, I think, was a very beautiful moment, and it shifted us right to the moment of the riots that were happening there in Memphis, and that were happening like around the country, Detroit, Atlanta, other places around the world, really engaged in that way. I hope I'm okay for time. My bad. Please, if there's a moment I need to stop, you just stop me. And sometimes I just get going. I get so excited about this stuff. So please stop me if I gotta stop. So here's another screen here. And you might ask, Dr. Gray, why do you have a slide about Twitch up here? When I told you all earlier, I said that a lot of my work focuses on like the ecosystem around gaming. So I don't just focus on one thing. The representations inside games is a significant part. The people who make the games, that's a very significant part, but those are only two parts of a larger system that is feeding and fueling the thing that we call gaming, right? And especially in our streaming world, streaming is a very significant aspect, to understanding gaming and gaming culture. And I think we all have to pay attention to it, right? Especially for like the technology folks, you all are a part of like the user experience. You want to make sure that these things run right and that the systems are designed right, that makes sense, right? And so for the humanities folks, we also have to think about, let's think about like the narrative experience inside there. What can people do? Can we tell stories? What kind of stories are being told? What kind of discourse is out there? What are the rhetorics that are associated with it, right? So all these things are happening in tandem with one another. So why did I share this screen right here? A few years ago, there was a leak of Twitch leaked the top earners of streamers inside the streaming space. So for those of you who might not know much about streaming, a lot of people have monetized their platforms of where, they can gain like a significant following, and people like will pay like and engage, and then they can run ads on the platform. You can run ads, you can get money and stuff. So like a lot of these platforms, are profit driven, and you can make money on them, right? Now, what's so significant about this list? Of course, I'm gonna give you the end of the story up front, so you already know where I'm going. This list, people were shocked at this list. There were no women on this list. Most of these dudes were white. And there was like people were shocked because the top earners, they thought the top earners were going to be the people that had like significant followers, that were really popular, like in the social media spaces, but that just wasn't the case. And so this left a lot of us questioning, how do you make money, and who are the people that are getting tapped, to monetize their streams and to run these ads? And then we recognized there were some racial and gender disparities in how Twitch decides who is going to be like the top earners, like on the platform, and who aren't, right? The contracts are not created equal. Some people can, get more money. And then we realize the gender disparity, that men are making the most money. White men are making like the most money. And, compared to like their East Asian counterparts, compared to women counterparts, compared to Black folks in the space, right? And so I think this was like eye-opening. But it reminded me of the piece that I had published and that I wrote on streaming. I did one piece on streaming. I was like, I don't have energy. I don't have energy. My heart can't take any more of this. I did that work around, probably 2014, 15, and it was published like I think in 2016. I did one paper on streaming. There was a group of Black men that I was following, and they were doing all the things. They were doing all the things that they thought were right. They said, there's a template of success. They were telling me this. They said, Dr. Gray, there's a template of success in here. First, we have to have something catchy and something entertaining. We got to be entertaining in the space, right? And there's something I called, actually, if I were to write about it again, I would call, there's a segment of streamers, I call them scream streamers, like the people like Speed, you all might know, people are like loud and over the top, right? So there are like different categories of templates that you can kind of draw from of how to be successful in the space. And so in their mind, they were like, okay, we have the template. And they said, this is better than the American dream. I remember when one of the participants in that study said, Dr. Gray, this is better than the American dream, because the American dream is elusive and there are so many structural barriers that would keep us from being able to attain it. But inside streaming, we all can do it. They told me, they said, things are equal here. The playing field is level. We can all succeed in this space. And in my mind, in my heart of hearts, I just knew that wasn't true, but I wasn't Gary Bus's bubble, because it was so significant. So, I started, watching and following him, around 2014. And then a couple, maybe like a couple years later, especially I was like preparing to write this piece. He was like, he remembered, he shared like a chat transcript with me. And he said, they're so racist, Dr. Gray. He said, anytime I go on streams, then I get called all these N-words, I get called monkey, these people say all these things. And he said, I'm not even doing Black content. Well, what does that mean? We'll talk about what that means in a second. He said, I'm out here. I'm just talking about, I'm just playing these games. We're talking about strategies. He said, but it doesn't matter because when people see my face, then I'm just too black for them in the space. And in one of the, in that transcription, there was a comment in there and somebody said that he was just too urban. And then he was like, Dr. He's a black dude. He's like a blurred. If you think about like a blurred, he speaks very standard American English. He's straight and narrow. I don't want to, I'm trying to be, very sensitive in how like I describe him. He's a very beautiful, human being, right? And then he said, they look at me and, no matter how I talk, how I dress, they're really going to look at me as like a thug, like in kind of in negative ways, right? And Black women talked about the same thing, a lot of women are sexualized, like in the space. We've heard of the thing, excuse the word, but we've heard of like titty streamers, of where there's like a certain expectation of like what women should do in the space. So we knew early on that this was not going to be a fair and equitable landscape. So I'm not shocked at all by a list like this, right? But I think that that's where a lot of like Black folks in particular, they transform their platforms, to focus more than on this Black content. They said, well, if they see me as this person, I'm just going to become that. And if you all were to read like intersectional tech, you can actually see some of those transitions and changes happening in time, because that intersectional tech was like a decades long, like ethnography of where these stories are being told, or where folks like are engaging, in these very in very like powerful and impactful ways. And the realizations that were happening like in real time, what I saw, what I already knew was there. But here I'm just an observer, I'm just observing the world. And it was really sad to like see the continued disappointment. They're continuing to be disappointed by these structures and systems. One of the biggest like disappointments was that, so many of them said, Dr. Gray, how come the platforms won't protect us? Mixer won't protect us. Twitch won't protect us. Discord won't protect us. We just want them to stop calling us nigger. We want them to stop, trolling and harassing us. We just want the hate rates to stop. We want all this to stop. So many of them had to come up with their own safety and protection, because there weren't trust and safety teams back in those days. So many people think about like the safety issues, then, but they weren't thinking about like who's the most vulnerable in the space. And so their conversations weren't thinking about racial harassment. They weren't thinking about like sexual harassment. And in fact, there's somebody on this list, I'll go ahead and name him. Destiny is like one of these people. He got a video right now of where he's just basically, espousing like rape culture and saying, yes, I'm out here sexually assaulting people and people don't care. He still is getting money. He's still getting money. I digress. Let me go on. Let me keep going. How much time do I have? Let me look at the clock. How are we for time? Because if at any moment you need to stop me, feel free to stop me. Okay. Because I can just go. Okay, somebody's typing in the chat to me. One of the things that I've shifted my energies to is really thinking about, like the connections with, okay, perfect. Is really thinking about like the connections with communities. One of the stories I was going to go into telling, and they're actually I will. Let me go ahead and just share this real quick so we can see this. So when I was in Chicago, I went to Pokemon Go Fest, excuse me. It's like a festival around like folks who were like engaged in like this Pokemon Go space. I had no idea what Pokemon Go was. I was doing work on the south side of Chicago with these young folks who introduced me to this world. It was fascinating. They were so excited, right? And they were looking forward to it. And so I was like, can I go with y'all? Can I see this? And they were like, sure. So I was like, okay. So we go up to take the red line up to like the touristy area. So folks like know like the Bean and stuff, Millennial Park, if you know those kinds of areas in Chicago, this is like where we were. And so when we got there, when I got there, because I got there before them, I didn't live too far away from this area. I was waiting for them, they never came. And I got a text message from them and they said, Dr. Gray, they won't let us in. And in my mind, I had a moment of naivety. I'm like, of course they won't let them in, Kishonna, because it's a group of Black boys and the anti-Blackness in the city is significantly strong. So there was already like this narrative that they're going to cause trouble. They're going to be a problem. So they couldn't come. And I had failed to do that. I should have greeted them and met them, but I went inside. I didn't know that was going to be an issue. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, forget this. We don't need this fest because we can do Pokemon Go anywhere. So Pokemon Go, for those of you who don't know, it's like a geolocation service, so you can just have your phone, and if we're in our phone, we can just walk around. We got connectivity, then we can just go around and we can just collect the Pokies and do our raids and do that thing, right? So I was like, well, let's just go back to the South Side. We don't need this. So we went back to the South Side. Oh, goodness. Little did I know Oh, goodness. Okay. Pokemon Go map. If you look at the map on the right, it's a very developed map. There are Pokies everywhere. Pokemon stops everywhere. We walk in. It's too many. We were at the north side of the city. We were inundated with it. When we went to Inglewood, we couldn't find any. And in fact, it took us a little while to kind of like walk and like locate the one that we did find. It was at a park and it was connected to a statue. And it's actually a Confederate statue that this Pokestop was connected to. So I'm like, oh my gosh, this couldn't have been like the worst scenario, right? Here, I told these kids that based on what I learned about the game, that we could do this game anywhere. My naivety, I'm like, of course we can't. Because remember when I talked about the blurring of the lines, right? How the real world still matches and tacks on to the digital environments because they cannot be separated. They are inextricably linked to one another. So, of course, the legacies of Jim Crow and redlining and gentrification and white flight are going to influence the experience that we have inside a game like Pokemon Go. One of the reasons we couldn't do it was because the city was not wired in a way that was wired on the north side. So this map on the left, that's the Wi-Fi hotspot map in Chicago. Chicago touts itself as one of the most wired cities in the world. And if you were to look at this map on the north side of the city, you would see those blue dots everywhere. We can connect to the internet at any time. We are not without the internet. We have to work hard to not have the internet on the north side of the city, but that was just not the case on the south side of the city. So that was one of the things that limited us, right? And so we relied on brick and mortar structures. We relied on the library to be able to play and to interact and to play video games and to connect. We had to have that physical infrastructure. The physical was so necessary and important for these young folks to still engage in gaming, right? And that's where we met. You know, we would meet up at the libraries. We would go here because a lot of them, they didn't have internet at home. There was no Wi-Fi there. There was nowhere for them to connect to. And this is an important story, a story that I can't even get into right now because I'm running out of time. But remember, this was pre-COVID. So going up to COVID, then Chicago has this crisis. They're like, okay, well, we're sending these kids home. Well, let's give them a computer so they can connect. But they don't have internet at home. And then they were used, you know, the city used them as like poster children for why we had to go back in person, you know, without protections in place to make sure that people were protected like from COVID in significant ways. But they said, but these kids, they're missing out because they don't have internet. I'm like, is that your takeaway from what's happening here? Instead of connecting, you know, to the infrastructure people in the space of the Cisco's or Spectrum or Xfinity, whoever makes the internet here, why are we not talking to them about making sure that we expand the broadband and the fiber optics and making sure that they get wired and connected so that the south side of the city looks like the north side of the city? But in fact, they said, forget their internet at home, get them back to school. And then they also tried to say, well, if they don't have school, then they're not eating. I'm like, actually, that's a lie because we actually set up the feeding station so that food was being delivered or they could pick it up. I'm like, so that's just a lie and that's just a cop out. But they use these kids as like a cop out. That's neither here nor there. So let me get on. Momo Pixel. I always love ending like with Momo Pixel. So sorry I had to jump a little bit quickly there. But Momo Pixel, I think she's the epitome of what I'm calling intersectional game design, or what I'm calling like Black game studies, where we think about, well, what of all these terrible games, Kishonna, can you give us one example of a game that does something very well? And I give you, you know, Momo Pixel. She created Hair Now as a way because she was traveling everywhere and people would want to touch her and pet her, you know, and then she created this simple mechanic, you know, of just like swatting away hands of like people trying to touch her. Now people see this like simple mechanic, but I see a really powerful experience that discusses like body politics, autonomy, consent, Black hair politics, race, gender. Like there are so many conversations that are in this simple experience. And I think it's just this beautiful example of what games can be. And I know I'm probably running out of time there. So I'll go ahead. I'll stop there so we can get to the Q&A. And I hope y'all got something from it. Like I said, with these things, I usually just have a great time with myself because I love this work so much. But hopefully I connected and hopefully I was able to come full circle at some point in there. I appreciate you all. Anthony, I'll turn it over to you all. can't hear anything in case someone's talking.
If anyone wants to ask a question, raise your hand. We'll run the mic to you and then ask it. Kishonna will answer. It's pretty simple. Anybody have a question? There is. Let's start there.
So Julia asks, in regards
I didn't hear the question. I'm so sorry. Is somebody able to hear the question? If somebody's there that can hear the question, that's completely okay. That's okay. You all just relay it to me if you can. I'm so sorry. I'm not hearing anything. Yeah, I'll go to the chat. Sure. It's completely okay. Julia's got a question here in the chat. I'll read it. In regard to the okay, great, Julia, thank you so much. In regard to the ethic of care and narrative, specifically, can you point us to some useful game examples and academic work being done in the area? Who should we be reading? That's a fantastic question. I think in the chat you have one of the OGs in this gaming space. Sophista is actually Samantha Blackman that's at Purdue. So Sam Blackman, one of my mentors, in both, the academic space and the gaming space. And she was one of the first people that I knew that was stream. And so I really love her platform, because she talks, she has a range of things that she discusses and engages and talks about, inside her platform. She talks about, issues related to identity. She talks about, like the technological, like advances and the affordances of like what we can do and what's possible inside these spaces. She has a beautiful, like pedagogical, kinds of like engagements, like with her stream, where she brings the stream inside the classroom as well. So she's one of the OGs in the space. So you most definitely have to follow her. Somebody else is Treyandria Russworm, who's currently at the University of Southern California in cinematic arts. So she is like one of also what I consider like one of the OGs. She talks a lot about like Black popular culture in particular. So she does like gaming stuff. Her and Jen Malkowski, they have like a book that talks about like representations like in games. So if you want more examples of games that do it well, games that aren't doing it well, that the book that they have is really like a beautiful testament to that. Also the work of like David Leonard, me and David Leonard, we co-edited, Woke Gaming like together. And I had asked him to do Woke Gaming with me. And it was so interesting because he was at a space of where he was done doing games studies. Like he was done doing research on gaming, because he came up, he's a generation like before me. And he said, nobody really cared about this game studies things, especially from like this kind of cultural like critique of it. So, he's really significant. And also Andre Brock, he's the scholar that does a lot of work like on Black digital media and social media and Twitter. And he has a book called Black Cyber Cultures, Distributed Blackness in particular. But I came into his work, from the gaming work that he did. Lisa Nakamura, she's not too far from you all. She's at the University of Michigan. So she's the one that works on like racial cyber types. I could really go on and on. So I want to make sure that I don't do that because there's so many people, but make sure you follow like Lisa Nakamura. And there are also like some young folks in the space who are doing some really amazing work. Javon Gord, Akil Fletcher, Stephanie Ortiz, she does work that looks at, men in particular, Black and brown men inside the gaming space and looks to see like what their experiences are. So there are a lot of folks inside this space that are doing like some really fantastic stuff. So I would say like engage in their work because they're being done like at the academic space. What I would point to, especially like useful games, of course I gave hair nod because I know I was going to get like that question of like, Kishonna, if all these things are all bad, is anybody doing it well? And the examples that I gave you, I don't want to say that those are examples that are bad or not done well. They are beautiful games. They're beautiful experiences. And I think they're pushing the the envelope of what's possible and what actually can be done, right? And a lot of these companies, they want to do better, they want to be better. So I want to make sure that, I'm not ragging like on these companies, but I think that they are also, they operate within like, the capitalist, kind of limits of what's possible, of what can be done, because at the end of the day, they have to make money. So they're going to make money like doing the things that happens like all the time. The Last of Us is like a game where, I don't know, I have a dilemma with The Last of Us, right? Because it's a really beautiful experience. I love playing it. And also there's an adaptation, of course, like on HBO. But I think where, I have to think about, how Black Death is used as like the narrative that pushes along, pushes the protagonist like along. And that kind of disrupts my spirit a bit, whenever I see so much Black Death. And I have to sit with that and engage it. I wish I was able to just be the person that could just ignore it and be like, oh, I'm gonna just watch it, or I'm gonna just play. But I have to interrogate the Black Death. And I would hope that you all, especially being, consumers of this, but also critics of this stuff, I hope that you all would take a moment and say, why do we need this particular mechanic inside the game? Is this really necessary? And is this propelling the story forward? Because if we were to take it away, like, is that taking away anything from the story? Especially folks who are going to be designing and making a lot of these experiences. Say, do I have to kill all these Black folks in order for this game to make some sense? And I think in some point you have to give us like some narrative justification of why, all this, Black death or queer death or trans death, why those things are like significant or important for the storyline. Yeah, I hope that helps. Yeah. I'll read some other questions. I don't think I'm hearing you all still, so I'll just read.
Anybody have any questions in here? Can you hear us?
I hear you.
Oh, hey. Okay, cool. Anybody? I see you. I'm coming.
Hello. Well, first of all, thank you so much. That was a great talk. A sort of general question I had, something that I started thinking of when you were talking about Pokemon Go. So a lot of times in media, like when we see these representations or when you're talking about Black Death, like for us as someone who doesn't have that experience, sometimes, it's hard to recognize the problem simply because I haven't had that experience, and that calls for empathy and being intentional about learning more. And obviously, like, we see these things because there's a lack of equity within, the development space. These companies are so largely white that they aren't really taking the time to be sincere in the way that they represent. But on a player-to-player standpoint, for these problems that people may not appreciate, especially problems that are on cultural or experience lines, how can we help players recognize and become more conscious and aware of those problems and retaliate against them?
I love that. Thank you so much for asking that question. I think it's the necessary question to ask, right? Especially when we know that folks have like good intentions and want to make, content that isn't disruptive, that is like propelling like a narrative forward, right? And I think the example that I want to use like in this moment is talking about like Black hair in particular, right? So many of these games continue to fail us at like the Black aesthetic is like what I call it. Can we create like a Black character? Maybe not, but we can have like a Black aesthetic of where the movement makes sense, the hair makes sense, the swag makes sense, right? And I started looking at this whenever I was in Xbox Live a long time ago, the avatar creation process. This is like Xbox 360 days, so a long time ago. But I remember with the avatar creation, it took a long time for us to be able to create like a Black character. And when I say Black, I just mean the pixelated, Black, right? Can I make this skin? How dark can I make this skin, right? But even when I was doing that, so we had like in the gaming lab, we had like a little bit of an experiment of like avatar creation. And so many of like the Black, participants in that study were like, okay, I think this might be blackface. And I'm like, say more. And they were like, this character didn't change at all. Basically, what I put a little cute t-shirt on him, put some little shoes on him, put a little hat on him. but this is still the default character. And we didn't, and I think that hit me pretty hard, because I was like, can we actually even create Blackness inside these spaces, right? And then we actually had an example during that time of actually somebody that was like doing it well. I think I took the slide out. I should have kept it in. But it was NBA 2K. It was the customization screen actually gave us a range to really create and do well. Now, we were able to do black men well. Like, couldn't create a woman in there. Of course not. Because women don't play basketball. But we couldn't create, black women. But when we created this black man, we were able to have different types of hair. We had different fading. We had different braids. We had different dreads. And then the movement was very significant, of where I remember, one of my students was like, oh, he got swag. Why can't I have swag over here in this space? So I use that as an example to say, there's a very beautiful and powerful feedback loop. Because if we go to Twitter, folks on Twitter are telling us exactly like it is. They are telling us how they feel. They are telling us where their disappointments are. They're telling us what their hopes and dreams are. We can go to Twitter right now and see how Black folks are feeling about The Last of Us, right? They're talking about it. They're saying it. We can go and see how they're feeling about, customizations inside games. We can see how they feel along all these lines, right? And so that channel of receptivity just has to be open for us to receive that information. But I think also in some of that messaging, and now our feelings might get hurt, because people might use, language that we might not like, these racist developers, right? We have to ignore those bits, and we have to pay attention to the bits that will allow us to be better. We might say, this sexist gaming industry. We have to ignore that bit, right? Because if we sit in our feelings, if we just sit in those moments, then we'll be like, well, I'm not racist, I'm not sexist. And then there's no movement forward. There's no growth in that, right? And I wish I could just, because so many times whenever I have conversations like with these industry folks, they spend so much time telling me about how they're not racist. And I sit and listen. I'm like, okay. Our problem is still here. So when are we going to reach that point of where we can talk about why these folks are upset, or why they trashed your game, why they dragged you on Twitter? Let's read in here and see, because folks are giving you everything that you need to do better and to be better. That's one part. Second part, diversify our teams too, right? But not only just diversify our teams, because that's not going to solve the problem. Because we have to think about the culture and the climate in which people are coming into the space. Now, these climates might be a little chilly, if we have to work with somebody like a Destiny dude, like, hey, y'all might accept rape culture in here, right? So you have to think about the space in which we're also bringing people in. Are they going to feel safe to express themselves? Are they going to feel safe enough to be able to say, all right, boss, I don't think that's a good idea. All right, Chad, I hear you, but I don't think that's going to work. Karen, I don't think we should do that. Are we going to be receptive enough to hear and to listen to what they're saying to us, and to what our teammates, what the people we brought on our team are saying? And I don't know. So, of course, diversifying teams would be like a significant thing. That's an important thing. But I think also we have to read read what is also there and what has happened and transpired before. I think one of my biggest frustrations is whenever I see companies just continuing to do the same thing over and over again. They're stuck in like this loop. They're stuck in this loop, and we're like, all right, we're going to just give you these 4 hairstyles and that's it. All right, Black woman about to cut you out on Twitter because they told you they want better hair options, right? So I think some of these conversations are a little easier than what we're making them out to be, right? Now, if folks are just like, I want better voices, right? Bring some voice actors in here. That's an easy thing. If I got a Black character, I'd like a Black voice to go with that. You can find them. There are Black voice actors out there. Hair. Look at you don't even have to recreate the wheel. I'm sure there's some hair sprites. Is that the word? Is that the design word? I'm sure there's some hair sprites somewhere, whatever the design word is, but where we probably can just copy and paste and load it. Now, and like I said, I told you at the beginning, I'm not a designer. I'm not a programmer. I'm not a coder, right? And so many people say, Kishonna, it's not as easy as you make it seem to be. That's hard for me, for my soul to consolidate that, right? I'm gonna tell you why. When I play a game like Grand Theft Auto and it has recreated the state of California, you recreated California from the rooter to the tutor. You got the mountains, you got the city, y'all recreated LA and San Francisco. It's hard for me to then say, you can't give me dreads when I have this beautiful world of whatever the Assassin's Creed's world are, which is just so beautiful. We're just riding and looking, right? It's hard for me to consolidate what I see the industry do and what it says it can't do, right? So I have patience, and I try to get them to move a little bit, because I wonder how much is like on their unwillingness to do so, right? Which is why the hashtag women are too hard to animate, when Ubisoft got in that trouble. But they got their acts together really quick. And sometimes a good dragging on Twitter is necessary. So sometimes I'm like, hey, we're just gonna pop off on Twitter. Let me give y'all some space to ask more questions. I hope that answers your question. Really, thank you for asking that. Really was the necessary question, I think, to ask. Thank you.
All right, we got 2 more questions online. We will read them out loud, and then please respond.
Are there any companies at work that are combating these disparities is the first question. The second one is a little longer. In regards to Hair Na and I Am Man VR, what advice would you have for Black people and people of color who are not creating their own indie games? How can we enter these spaces to make impact?
That's a tough one, right? And so I think the knee-jerk reaction would be to create our own spaces, right? In the ideal world, when I was talking about like ideal conditions, we would just create our own spaces. But I think people don't realize how unrealistic that is. I heard Sean Alexander, the guy who created Beatdown in Treachery City. Y'all should look that up. Somebody put that in the chat for me. Beatdown in Treachery City. I want to give shout outs to him as a Black creator and developer in the space. He gave me the overview of what it looked like to create your own studio and to do your own work. And I don't think I realized how expensive it was, right? How time consuming it was. And how difficult it was to do that part that I said of like, let's just create our own, right? It's kind of like unrealistic. Especially if you're relying like on Kickstarter money and Kickstarter funds and, like startups, venture capital, and people aren't just willingly giving Black people and brown people money. They're just not doing it. I remember seeing a thread about somebody who had, was it the Harriet Tubman Slayer experience? I'm not sure if I can remember, but I remember that team was saying that they did all the things. They generated the interest, they had the social media buzz, they had the following, they had all the things in place. But then the people who they were trying to get the money from, they was like, well, we just don't see it. Why would anybody want to play Harriet Tubman as a Slayer? Mama, I'm like, right? And the counterpart to that story is that there was a team that had an idea. It wasn't even a fully thought out, fully fleshed out. It wasn't even a full proposal. It was like, hey, dude, we should do this. And they got money. Like, I wish I could find that. I wish I could find the article. But it was like they got money because they looked right. There were cishet white dudes, and so there was like this instant automatic trust of them and what they were going to do with the money, right? As opposed to this team of Black dudes from, Detroit or Baltimore, wherever they were from, they were like, we don't know. Because, because there's still this assumption that Black people don't play games, Black people don't make games. And so we are still trying to counter these narratives that Black people are just not in the tech world. When in your chat, in the YouTube chat right now, there are some brilliant, talented Black folks right now in that chat that just need opportunities and like need a chance. Brilliant designers, brilliant makers, brilliant social media managers right there in your chat right now. But so often, you know, we hear people say, oh, the applicant pool is not diverse. Well, where are we looking? Where are you looking? And also, when you're looking, how are you looking at them? Let me give you an example of what I mean by that. A computer science degree from MIT versus a computer science degree from Howard University. The industry does not see them in the same way. Why is that? So I get MIT is, you know, is among the best and the brightest, the Stanfords, the Caltechs, you know, I get that, right? But if we realize, if we recognize how hard it is to just get there, you got to have a pedigree, some credentials. You got to have all these things right in order for you to get to the Harvards and the MITs of the world, right? Hell, it's even hard for folks, sometimes even from the US, to gain entry into those companies. I remember seeing like this Twitter thread of somebody was mad that I guess the incoming class at Stanford, you know, I think it was like only 20% white. And I guess they thought it looked too Asian. I thought it was awesome. I thought it was dope. But anyway, you know, I kind of say that, you know, kind of like tongue in cheek, right? But I think we have to see value in these other pathways and these other ways into computer science, into engineering, right? You know, when we devalue HBCUs, even Alex Hanna, do you all remember when Alex Hanna, I think she was talking about, she had this thread of where she was talking about working with the recruiters at a lot of these spaces and how these companies and these corporations actually, you know, they give more points to people who come from those so-called feeder schools of like the MITs and the Stanfords and Caltechs and stuff. And whereas actually you get points against you if you come from like the HBCUs, right? So you get a little bit more credit. Like if you're at the state schools, you get like a little bit more credit. But like if you're at the HBCU, then you get no love, right? And so I think we have to think differently about what it means to be a creator in this space and think about who are we allowing inside these spaces? Because if we just continue with the same ways, then the gaming industry is going to continue to look very white and male, cis het, and you know, starting to becoming more and more Western, you know, especially with the anti-Asian rhetoric and the, you know, all those narratives that are actually, you know, continuing like to feed, you know, like these industries, especially right now, like where we're at right now. Hell, somebody can listen to this talk and say, oh, she's talking about CRT. I ain't said nothing about CRT, but when I'm talking critically in these ways, you know, it will disrupt, you know, some of the, you know, it will disrupt, you know, white sensibilities of, you know, people, of what people might think, when I'm just speaking in reality and saying what's there. I'm telling your story. I'm telling the story of what is there. So, and when me saying that the gaming industry is mostly white and male, I'm saying what I see on the websites. And if I say, well, I think you should diversify for your own goods, you know, some people will be like, oh, she shouldn't exist no more. Anyway, I've said too much. Other questions?
I think that's actually all we have time for. Thank you so much, Kishonna. For you guys, just a reminder, we have March 16th. That's this Thursday. It's in 2 days. You have another co-ed lecture. On April 6th, we're doing an AI roundtable. We invite all of you to come see us, come talk with us. There's going to be a representative from each college there. And then at the end of the semester, there's the LTU show. That is all we have for you today. Thank you for coming. We'll see you guys next time.